Next, we'll hear from Laurie Hallmark. Laurie, let me just pull this up real fast, Laurie. And she's going to be presenting an overview of Psychiatric Advanced Directives, or PADS. Laurie Hallmark is a Special Project Director, Mental Health Programs at Texas RioGrande Legal Aid. Laurie, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chris. Make sure I get my... Okay, if for some reason you cannot see my slide, please let me know. Okay. So at their essence, a Psychiatric Advance Directive is a self-determination based legal rights document, just like any other advance directive, right? So if I have a medical situation, I want to be able to prepare in advance so that I can maximize my ability to maintain my, my choices. It's the same thing with mental health crisis, right? So a Psychiatric Advance Directive is a way to prepare in advance, hopefully prevent the crisis from happening in the first place. But if it does, at the least, prevent escalation and reduce the disruption to my life and the harm that may be caused otherwise. And critically, maximizing my ability to maintain my decision making, right? So it's a way for a person to have a voice when things may be out of control, when they may not otherwise be able to express their wishes clearly. It is the well human being able to make decisions for their unwell self. But I think that it might be helpful to talk about PADS in action. Okay, Frank. So anybody who has not spent their entire life inside of a major city has probably met somebody like Frank. He is a pure outdoors person. Give him a tree to find, go camping, fishing is a really big deal. He likes mudding, all those kinds of things. He reminds me of various people I have known in many places that I've lived, as long as it's not in a major city. He reminds me of one of my cousins. And as I recall, when we were kids, we seemed to manage to seek out a variety of different areas with mud, looking for turtles, which I remember being successful a number of times. But so that's Frank. He would spend all of his time outside if he could, just loves being outdoors. Now, in the course of his outdoor activities, Frank made a very bad decision. And his bad decision was he killed a buck on private property without permission in the state of Texas. This is a very bad decision. Now that buck, the state of Texas valued that buck at $10,000. So his decision to kill the buck on private property without permission in the state of Texas, the charge associated with that is a state jail felony. So we have a problem. And now Frank knows that the police are involved, which creates a whole new situation. So he's having a mental health crisis at this point. He's having responses to the fact that he knows that he has now a situation with law enforcement. And in the ensuing events following the initial event, he managed to collect a variety of other charges. So now we're dealing with a situation where one bad decision has now led into a variety of serious charges. And this is where a Psychiatric Advance Directive could have helped. So there's a section in a Psychiatric Advance Directive where a person can provide individualized information about any kind of engagement with law enforcement and crisis personnel. So it's a way for a person to say, hey, you know, even with all the great crisis intervention training, I can provide you additional complementary, supplementary information so that if I do have to have an engagement with law enforcement, or if I am engaging with some sort of crisis personnel, I know there are certain things that you can do to make things less terrible. There are de-escalation techniques that I can provide to you. Now, Frank didn't have a PAD at the time, So this did not occur, but think about what is possible if you have the ability to reduce those extra charges, to reduce the potential for danger, as well as to reduce the arrests. Okay, but so that's not what happened. So Frank now has a variety of charges that he's dealing with. So he goes to court. Now, if Frank had been deaf, or if he had been a person who needed assistive technology in order to help him to communicate, we would understand and automatically recognize that that's something that we need to do. It would at least occur to us. With mental illness, it typically doesn't even occur to us. So what ended up happening was Frank was there. He's trying to communicate with his lawyer. He's trying to communicate with the court, and everybody's talking past one another. There's no meeting of the minds when it comes to this is the communication that we're having. And this is where a PAD could have had an impact, because inside a psychiatric advance directive, a person is able to say, this is how you can most effectively communicate with me. Here are the accommodations that I need in order for you to be able to speak my language, in order for us to be able to communicate across this divide. But he didn't have a PAD, and we didn't have these tools. And so the inevitable occurred, which is that Frank was declared incompetent to stand trial. Okay. So now he is in jail. For anybody to be put in a jail, it's certainly not going to improve anyone's health. It's going to make a well person unwell. This particular jail was better than many that I've seen, but it didn't have the ability for him to go outside. And not only could he not go outside, but he couldn't even see the outside. He didn't have a window. So for a person like Frank, who is an outdoors person and wants to spend as much time as possible outside, being shut away from any kind of access to nature. I mean, not even any air that's not that institutional recirculated air. He immediately started to deteriorate. This is a bad situation all around. And so he's starting to have issues with the guards and problems within the jail. And so now we have multiple extra things going on here, right? He's deteriorating, and it's possible that he could either get hurt or he could collect additional charges based on what's going on in that jail. And this is where a PAD also would have had the ability to assist him. So there's a section in the PAD that provides information that's useful inside hospitals or inside jails for how to de-escalate a situation that may otherwise lead to an intervention that's an emergency intervention, such as a forced injection, seclusion, or restraint. And these results are bad for everybody concerned. So a PAD, one of the great things about it is it can say, hey, you know what? Before things get to this point where you feel you need to take these steps, here are the things that can help. Here are the ways to de-escalate. That is critical information for hospitals and for jails. Okay, so this is where I enter the picture, meeting Frank. So we had the same goal. Our goal was for Frank to get out of jail. This was the goal. Unfortunately, we weren't really able to communicate with each other initially. I went in there, I met with him, and we were able to meet in a room, a rec room, which was good because it's much better than meeting with glass or some kind of barrier between us. But those rooms, the room is fairly big. It's full of concrete and metal, and everything echoes. So it's very difficult to even try to have a conversation at all because you have these echoes. And he is sitting there. So he's handcuffed, he's shackled. Not only are his hands cuffed, but they're attached to his waist, and he has shackles around his ankles as well. So we are not sitting in an equal kind of situation. So I'm trying to communicate with him. I'm trying to let him understand, look, we are on the same side, but we have to work together in order to get you out of here. And I wasn't able to get through. And so again and again, I met with him, and it got to the point where I could tell he was trying to hold back tears. And then one day what ended up happening is when you go out of those rooms, the inmate has to be let out first. So he was waiting for the guard to come and let him out of the room. And I just said, is there anything that I can bring you? And he had started crying at that point, but his back had been to me. And he turned around and he said, yeah, you can bring me a leaf. And at that point, I realized just how absurd it was, this whole situation where I'm asking him what I can do for him. And he is inside of a jail where he can't even see the sky. He can't even breathe fresh air. And so now I know, okay, well, I have an in. So I thought about it. And what I ended up doing is I took it as an excuse to go to a clubhouse that I had worked at before. And I talked to the members. And I let them know about Frank and the fact that he was sitting in this jail and able to access nature and everything that was going on. And so I had a bunch of volunteers who helped me. And what we did was we went out into the garden and we picked leaves and various other items. I think I got some from the store so he would have some herbs that would be really smelly, and put them in wax packets. The captain of the jail allowed me to bring these in. And when I brought them in and I pulled them out and I dumped them over the table, he smiled. And then he cried. But what this enabled, that piece of information that could have been in his pad, if he had had one at that point, I would have known that this is something that can help. And what that did was, as he was sitting there and opening the packets and smelling the leaves and being able to touch and have this tangible connection with the outside, we were able to communicate with each other and get on the same page so that we could work together to our common goal, which was to get him out of that jail. So I do think that there is something fundamental within human beings that we need to have access to nature. And certainly Sammy would agree with me on this. Okay, so let me tell you, I'll tell you a little bit about Sammy. Sammy is one of my favorite people in the whole world. He's one of my favorite people that I've ever met in my entire life. When I met him, he was in his late 60s, and he's in his early 60s now. And since the mid 80s, Sammy has been traveling around. He's walked all over the United States. He's walked down into Latin America. This is how he lives his life. If you offered him an apartment, he would not take it. He does not want to live inside. He is happiest when he's sleeping outside under the stars. Now, he does also consider, he's aware that based on his lifestyle, there are a variety of charges that he is able to pick up for trespassing and other basically the criminalization of homelessness and mental illness. But he considers that he doesn't bear any ill will. He considers spending some time periodically in jail as the price that he pays for his freedom. So yeah. Okay, so how I met Sammy was a JP, a Justice of the Peace from this little town, called me up and said, hey, we've got this man here. He's homeless. We don't want him here. Please come and do something about this, because otherwise we're going to keep arresting him until we can send him away. So that is its own problem that we're not going to delve into right now. So what I did was I went over and I met with Sammy under a tree outside the courthouse. And we talked about this situation of they don't want him here, but he does want to live, out in the world. So what we did was, through our problem solving, we were able to come up with a method for him to exist where he's at least not going to be arrested in this little town, and reduce the chances that he would be arrested. So he has a hub, and when he feels the need to go traveling around, he goes out and spokes from the hub, but only so far, and then he goes back. Now, the ability when you are using supported decision-making in order to do problem solving, to create a pad, one of the really big advantages of that is someone like Sammy doesn't want anything to do with the system typically, right? But now that we're problem solving, we're on the same team and his wishes are being respected. Now he's open to accessing additional services. And that's really critical. And what it has enabled for Sammy, it's only within the past couple of months that this has occurred, but it's something that gives me happiness to know that it has happened. He signed a medical power of attorney. And that was, again, just within the past couple of months. And the way that I won't go into all that. What that medical power of attorney means, what the fact that we were able to problem solve and have the trust and demonstrate the respect for his decisions. What that means is that the way that Sammy has chosen to live his life, he has been free and made his own decisions in his life. And the medical power of attorney is going to give him the ability to do the same thing in his death. And so what could be more important than that? I'm going to travel all the way back to Sofia. So Sammy, we met him at the end of, towards the end of his life. I don't think he's going to live too much longer. He looked pretty bad the last time I saw him. Sofia's at the beginning of her life. Okay. So she's about early 20s. She's only, when I met her, she was about 15 credit hours from graduating college, first person in her family to ever go to college. And mania psychosis happened, right? First episode psychosis, she didn't know what was going on. She had a psychotic break all over her university. And this obviously didn't happen in a vacuum. So she gets a little bit more stable. She's out of the episode, she's stabilized. And the first thing that she's thinking now is, I can't do anything. All of the messages she's receiving is your life is over. All those plans and goals that you had before this episode, just forget them. They're done. They're over with. So that was the first thing that we talked about. And I told her about Ellen and gave links. I always do that. So that was the first thing. Now we have a little bit of hope that it is possible. She can still have a life. I mean, she's, early 20s and thinking that she has no choices anymore. She has no life. It's over. So we talked about that first. And then the next thing that occurred is something I think it's easy to forget, which is that she had mania psychosis all over the university, right? This did not happen in a vacuum. And so all of the conduct that she engaged in, now that she's out of mania psychosis, she's aware of what she did. And the shame of what she had done, as well as the horror of having this diagnosis now, this is where we were. But here's what a PAD can do. Not only did the method of our communication enable her to understand that her life is not over, but it allows us to prepare so that that can be implemented, so that the future that she wants can actually happen. How? So we can prepare for practical matters, right? So if I go into a mental health crisis, I know that I need someone to call the school, hopefully before I get to that point, but someone needs to call the school and let them know that I'm not going to be there so I don't flunk out. Someone needs to take care of my plants or my bills or whatever it is. There's a way to prepare in advance. So guess what? Even if you are still going to have a crisis, even if it is still going to happen, you know what? That doesn't mean that your life is over. And it doesn't mean you can't go back to school and do all the things that you wanted to do before. It just means that you need to take some extra precautions, get some extra planning in there. And the other thing that we were able to do is to identify accommodations that she will need in order to be able to go back to school. So hopefully it will be that the Psychiatric Advance Directive and the creation of the Psychiatric Advance Directive and the implementation of it will enable her to access the life that she wanted before, that it doesn't have to be a before and after end, that there is a way for her to access the things that she always wanted to do. And also with advanced planning is Isabella, again at the beginning of her life trajectory. She's very young, also experienced mania psychosis. She's had more than one episode by the time that I met her. She was very close with her mother. They had always had a really good relationship. And actually Isabella was a support for her mother because she was the only person in her family who spoke English. So she was the interpreter for her family. So they had been living, a nice life. And things were starting to break down pretty quickly because I think, as we know, that those family relationships can become very strained very quickly, and that's what was happening. So they came in, and Isabella wanted her mother in the room. She made very sure that she did want her mother in the room, and so we tried to think about problem solving. What are we going to do? So the first thing that we knew we could do is we could go ahead and put in her PAD. These are the medications that work. These are the medications that don't work. Here is a way to engage with me. If you're law enforcement or if you're crisis personnel, here are all the things that I know will help. But she also wanted to prepare so that she wouldn't have a crisis in the first place. She is aware, Isabella is aware enough when she starts to ascend into mania and descend into psychosis that there is a window. She told me it's about a 3-day window where she has the chance to stop it from going all the way to the other end. And that's where she wanted to do some problem solving. We did it with her mom. And so what had been happening is her mom, when she would, that 3-day window, Isabella identified, okay, if I take my meds, that would be a good idea. But when I'm in this window, I don't want to take my meds. And what her mother was doing was, as soon as she saw things started to go a little awry, she was immediately starting to say, well, hey, have you taken your meds? Will you take your meds? Please take your meds. Why haven't you taken your meds? She was trying to help. And that was making things worse. So what we did, we came up with a creative solution that she's aware of the delusions that start to happen when she's sinking into psychosis, but not totally underwater inside of it. And so what she did was she wrote letters to herself specifically for those time periods, her well self telling her unwell self the things that she knows her unwell self will hear. Her mother was a little skeptical at first, but she was like, let's try it. So she has the letters and, she can use those. The other thing that Isabella did, and this has only happened once or twice, this is very unusual, and she wanted this to occur. She does not want to go all the way into psychosis. And she identified some objective markers, like I have not eaten in X number of days or however many hours. I have not slept in X number of days. At this point, I direct my mother to take action to have me put into a hospital. It's not subjective, very objective. She wanted it, so that's what we did. And I like to think of her psychiatric advance directive of the way for this family to be able to live the life that they had in the past, to be able to have their loving relationship restored and not deteriorate in the way that so often happens, but they have the plan in place, because sometimes things are going to pop up. It's under the surface, but it's there, but you know what, we can deal with it. Now, Sammy, all the way at the end, right? And I don't know of any family that he has. I am just assuming I haven't brought it up. I don't think that he has any family support at all. My assumption is that those relationships were ruptured a long time ago. So Frank's father worked his entire life, all of his working years outside as a physical laborer. And no matter what anybody thinks about the oil fields or, the environment when it comes to oil and fracking, that is really hard work. I'm not talking about like someone who's sitting in an office. I mean, the folks who work out there, this is backbreaking work. It destroys their bodies and they don't last long. So Frank's father, Frank Sr., he had spent his life in the oil fields and working construction, and you could tell. He had applied for disability, but he was rejected. He was denied. He needed to do an appeal. But by the time Frank was arrested, their relationship was completely fractured. They were not communicating with each other anymore. So we're kind of in between here, right? We have Isabella and Sofia, who it hasn't quite happened yet. There's the ability to prevent this. Sammy, it's way too late, but here there was still a chance. So while Frank was in jail, his father was only able to go and visit him, I think only once. He lived a couple of hours away. He had a really old truck that barely worked, and he couldn't afford the gas. I mean, if you think about it for a minute and you say, okay, well, how can you not afford, $40, $50 of gas? Well, if I don't have any money, then, $30 might as well be $3,000 or $30,000. I don't have it. So he wasn't able to visit him very often, but they were able to communicate by phone. And during this time period, they repaired their relationship. So that was critical. Okay, so 9 months, I figured out how to communicate with him. And also we have now a reentry peer. So we are using supported decision-making. We're supporting our client. We're communicating with him. We're having success. We're all working together. Everyone's goal is the same. So excellent. And that is how, if we had the effective communication section of the PAD from the very beginning, hopefully we would have never ended up in this situation, but we sorted it out through supported decision-making. Nothing else has changed. So now he goes back to court and we're able to communicate. There's not this communication barrier. And that was completely due to supported decision-making. This is information that can go in the pad. These are the accommodations that I need. These are the people who can help to communicate with me, who understand the way that I think. Frank's father did come for the court date, and we were all hoping that the judge would, declare Frank restored and let him leave. And he wanted to go and live with his father, and his father wanted him to live with him as well. And so Frank Sr. came to the court, and I remember watching him talk to the judge, and he was sitting forward with his elbows on his knees and his hands were out. And it was as if he was taking every part of who he was and offering it to her, to beg her to allow his son to leave and to leave with him. It was an extraordinary thing to witness. So she did. So he had spent 9 months in jail, and this is a low estimate. So we know that the buck state of Texas valued the buck at $10,000. Frank sat in this jail where he didn't have access to the outside or to fresh air or even to see the sky for 9 months at this point when he was released. This is an underestimate. This is all county money, right? So how expensive is it for Frank to sit inside this jail? It was over $10,000 for this. I've estimated it about $40 a day. That's low. However, if you want to look at it, this could have been avoided if we had had that information so that we could communicate with him, but at least we got him out early. So what this meant was we had essentially a savings of the months that he likely would have remained in jail waiting on a bed at the state hospital. So this is county money. Now it's county money to be transferred to the hospital. It's about now with the forensic patients in the state hospital, that's now state money, and it's about $500 to $600 per day. So who knows how much that would have been. Going back to the jail and then time in jail so that the rest of the charges could be dealt with. So this was our savings, even though we could have avoided all of it. At least we had this savings. So this is expensive. To the extent that psychiatric advance directives can prevent the arrest, can prevent people being declared incompetent, it's good for the person. We know that. I mean, just that's obvious, but it's also really good fiscally. I mean, this is expensive. Counties don't have all this money. This is really expensive, and there's a way around that. Okay, so he's released. This work is many, many things. I am privileged to have the colleagues that I have, and I am even more privileged to be able to know the human beings who have allowed me into their life and in this work. But it's also very difficult. And when Frank got out, I was able to at least witness their reunion of Frank and his father, and it was a very good day. So he left and he went with his father, and they went to where his father lives, an RV on some family land, nice RV. And Frank was able to get a job at doing landscaping, which was really great, made me very happy. And he sent me about 2 months after I received a text where Frank is holding a baby deer. And he had apparently in their landscaping, the baby deer had become entangled in some fencing. And so he disentangled the deer, and he sent me a photograph of him holding the baby deer. And I really like that. I think that it's fitting. So at this point, we know what the state of Texas values a buck, or this particular buck, $10,000. So Frank sat in jail, and that was another $10,000. That's $10,000. And how much he would have, the rest of the money that would have been spent if he had remained in jail and had not been declared restored. And we also know the harm that came from Frank sitting in jail without having the ability to access the outdoors. But the other thing that happened is about 3-4 months after he got out of jail, his father died. I didn't realize how bad off he was. I mean, I knew that I could tell that he was really unwell, but I didn't know that he was that close to death. And so when he died, Frank had a strong reaction, obviously. And this is threatening now his freedom again because he's on probation. And a PAD can enable a cross-system communication that can prevent somebody from being revoked, that can say, you know what, something is going on and let's modify. Let's look at what we're doing here and maybe we don't have to revoke this person. I had a relationship with the probation officer, so did Red, our peer, and he understood, and Frank was not revoked. It's been a couple of years and he's doing really well. And one of the things that was most upsetting to him was that there is a restitution fee associated with this book. And it's a very high fee. It's $10,000 plus. And there's no way that he can ever pay that. So, and one of the things that the effect of that is that you can't get a hunting or fishing license. Now, he wasn't concerned with the hunting license. I think he kind of decided that possibly he doesn't need a hunting license, is not a good idea anymore. But he loves fishing. We had a little talk when he got out of jail about the whole situation of the fishing license and the fishing and everything else. I'm not sure how much he heard, or how much we could actually communicate effectively on that issue. But when I think of Frank, I remember his father, and I'm so grateful that they were able to have at least some time with him out of jail. They were able to have the last few months of his life together. And then the other thing that I think is that I really hope that he is well hidden somewhere on some water in the state of Texas, very hidden, fishing. So it is my privilege and honor to be able to do this work and to be able to serve the people that we are trying to serve. And I really appreciate your time and willingness to listen to me. So thank you very much.